Virginia, 1856. The moon hung low over the James River, silvering the tobacco fields that stretched like a green sea under the night sky. In the quarters, where the enslaved slept on bare boards with only a scrap of blanket between them and the cold, one man did not sleep. He could not. His name was Henry, though the white folks called him Big Ben, and when he stood to his full height, the top of his head brushed the low rafters of the slave cabin as if the building itself had been built too small for the man God put inside it. 7 feet tall, maybe 7 feet and an inch or two more, depending on who told the story and how much corn liquor had passed their lips. Shoulders wide as an ox yoke, arms longer than most men's legs, hands that could palm a 10-pound sledge like it was a child's toy. When he walked, the ground seemed to complain under his weight. When he spoke, his voice rolled out deep and slow like distant thunder that hadn't yet decided whether to break into storm. They said he was born on a plantation down in Southampton County, the same blood-soaked ground where Nat Turner once made the night run red. They said his mother was a Guinea woman, tall and fierce, who died birthing him because no woman's body was meant to carry a child that size. They said his father was either an Ashanti king sold off the slave coast or the devil himself. Take your pick, both stories were told with the same hushed terror. But here is what they did not say in polite company, what they whispered only when the lanterns burned low and the children were asleep. This man, this quiet, slow-moving mountain of a man, had made his master, the proud and cruel Colonel Josiah Wentworth, one of the richest planters in all of Virginia, run for his life like a rabbit before the hound. Picture it. It was late October, the air sharp enough to bite. The colonel had come back from Richmond flush with brandy and bad temper. One of the house girls had broken a china cup, an accident, nothing more, but the colonel was in the mood to make an example. He stormed into the yard roaring for the overseer, roaring for the whip, roaring for Big Ben, because when Colonel Wentworth wanted someone broken, he sent for the biggest man he owned, as if sheer size could be beaten out of a soul. They dragged Henry from the blacksmith shop where he worked, his massive hands still black from the forge. The colonel screamed at him to hold the girl down. Henry stood there, silent, the muscles in his jaw working like millstones. The girl, barely 14, was sobbing, pleading. The overseer cracked the whip against the ground, impatient. And Henry said, soft as falling ash, "No, sir." Just that, 2 words. "No, sir." The yard went still. Even the dogs stopped barking. You could hear the wind moving through the sycamores like a warning. Colonel Wentworth's face turned the color of fresh liver. He raised his riding crop to strike Henry across the face, something he had done 100 times before, because what man wouldn't flinch from pain, no matter how big? But Henry did not flinch. Instead, he lifted one hand, slow, deliberate, and closed his fingers around the colonel's wrist. Not hard enough to break bone. Just enough to remind the colonel that he could. Just enough for the colonel to feel, for the first time in his life, what it was like to be the smaller creature in the grip of something greater. The riding crop fell to the dirt. They say the colonel's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. They say his eyes went wide as a child's who has seen a ghost walk in daylight. And then, Lord help us all, he turned and ran. The master of 700 acres, owner of 200 souls, wearer of fine broadcloth and polished boots, ran stumbling across his own yard. Past the big house, past the stunned faces of his wife and daughters on the porch, all the way to the stables where he locked himself in with the horses and would not come out until sunrise. And Big Ben, he simply let go of the wrist, bent down, picked up the fallen riding crop, and handed it back to the overseer like a man returning a borrowed tool. Then he walked back to the forge, picked up his hammer, and went on with his work as if nothing had happened at all. Word spread faster than wildfire in dry grass. From Richmond to Petersburg, from the big houses to the quarters, from the auction blocks to the riverboats, they told the tale. There is a giant in Virginia, 7 feet tall, who made his master run. Some laughed until they cried. Some crossed themselves. Some began to wonder, for the first time, what might happen if more men decided to say, "No, sir." Tonight, I want you to meet this man. Not the myth, not the whispered legend, but the man. I want you to stand in his shadow and feel the weight of what he carried, and the weight of what he laid down that night. Because the story of Big Ben is not finally about how tall a man can grow in body, It is about how tall a soul can grow when it decides that some things are worth more than survival. He never raised his hand in violence. He never spilled a drop of blood. He simply refused to be the instrument of someone else's cruelty, and in that refusal, he turned the whole order of things upside down with nothing more than the quiet strength of a man who had looked into the pit of hell and decided he would not climb down into it to drag someone else after him. 7 feet tall, they said. But I tell you this. On the night he made his master run, Henry stood taller than any man in Virginia. Taller than the Blue Ridge, taller than the pride of the Old Dominion, taller than the lie that said some men are born to bow and others born to break them. Come with me now back to 1856. Walk with me through the tobacco rows where the dew hangs heavy and the scent of broken leaves fills the air. Listen for the sound of a hammer on an anvil that rings like a slow heartbeat. And when we reach the forge, when the firelight paints the sweat on a giant's skin like molten gold, I want you to look into his eyes. Quiet, steady, unafraid, and ask yourself the question that has burned in the hearts of the oppressed from the day Pharaoh first felt the breath of Moses on his neck. What happens when the one you called a beast decides to stand up straight and speak with the voice of a man? That night in Virginia, the answer began with 2 words spoken softer than a prayer and louder than any cannon that ever thundered across a battlefield. No, sir. And a master ran. Tonight, we are going to follow him, both the man who ran and the man who made him run. We are going to walk through the fire of that moment and see what the flames reveal about fear, about power, about the image of God stamped on every human soul no matter how long the chains or how deep the night. Because the giant of Virginia still walks among us. He stands in every soul that has ever said, thus far and no farther. He casts his shadow every time someone too small, too tired, too afraid, finds the courage to stand up straight and say, no more. 7 feet tall in 1856. But in the kingdom of God, he stands taller still.